talking about the fact there's a huge amount of unread, produced commodities which are lying around in the name of knowledge gain in modern academic practice. Now, the question is, does this make this the same as slop? I don't think so. There are different kinds of things. But what both of them point out to is that the fundamental drive which has produced this is the idea of excess. And it is actually about modes of production, nothing else. Just as much as the kinds of pre-modern technologies to pre-modern science and technology becomes modern science and technology, one of the greatest change in that is the change of scale. It is not that people are not doing various kinds of technologies, but the scale, the factory model, and then the industrialized model, etc., comes in. It is also at the same time that modern establishments of institutions of technology and science also happen, and where knowledge also becomes a kind of a factory produced product. And therefore, the enormous, one might say, well, actually, all this knowledge in the sciences and tech or in academics in general are being driven by something else, by a passion to know.
Now, I think that the problem that the nature of slop is that it doesn't sit. It doesn't sit still, and it is slop. So it slops and it flops. And I want to, and flops are also very important as part of the design features of language, which I'll get into, AI flops. But anyway, so because it is the nature of slop to slop. And I agree with Sundar that this is not a new phenomenon. I believe that it is encoded into the human mind, into the way we evolved evolutionarily. So I want to now bring it down. I recognize the importance of current overproduction, of the models of extractive production and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so let me focus, in an overall sense on I think it has been argued, and I think argued from a variety of very, very rich and diverse perspectives as to how slop has been an inherent part of our experience through the beginning of time. I mean, in the sense that has always been a part of language, it has been a part of how so slop by itself is not new. I think what I would argue is that what it has done is fundamentally, and I do think it has fundamentally changed the landscape purely through scale. Because I think, up to a point when slop was either inherent in language or in certain, as Sundar pointed out, in terms of, let's say, an area like research publications where you have an enormous amount of slop, and certainly the grand central of slop is LinkedIn, where, or business conversations, so business conferences, uh, to which I have been to an unfortunately large number. So I think that has always existed. But I do think that when knowledge production becomes such a performance that is accessible to all, I think that fundamentally changes things. And I think then the question arises as to whether what is being produced is at all knowledge, or it is simply the act of being able to produce something that looks like knowledge. And therefore I do think that is the question now, that which is, if the knowledge production becomes an ability that is, not only universally or at least widely available and has clear social rewards, therefore there is a strong incentive to produce knowledge, things that look like knowledge. And I think that's what we are seeing, that actually to equate production of either writing or speech as being constitutive of knowledge, I think itself, I think there is a schism there, that is not an automatic kind of a translation. And I think that's important, because I don't think the intention is knowledge production. The intention is self production, in a sense. The evaluation that is implicit in the use of language. We've always used language and its deployment as a sign of being able to evaluate somebody and bracket somebody in a certain slot. And when that becomes widely accessible to everybody, that ability to use language as a mechanism for evaluation, I think itself gets severely compromised. And I think that also creates disorientation. I mean, very specifically, of course, in the academic function when you are evaluating students, because that is important. But even in terms of social discourse, when implicitly we are judging and bracketing people based on their deployment and use of language, that becomes much more difficult to navigate. And so, to come back to the question that you asked, I do think there is a significant difference in the sense that we find that ourselves lost, I think, in an epistemic field, in a sense, which is where the markers are less clear. We live in a world where AI slop is read by AI agents. And therefore, they have this little cozy twosome where there is that kind of a closed world. Because I cannot see, human beings kind of spending time trying to read all of this. To me, the more disquieting question is, right now there is this very cozy, easy kind of a assumption that what AI creates is slop, or we are able to classify it as slop, however we define it. What if it stops creating slop? What if it actually creates something that is indistinguishable from original human thought, which currently it is by no means, right? But if it is, what happens to our understanding? So to me, that really is the question that bothers me.
Another thing that I find quite alarming is that it leaves out 98% of the society. I'm using that figure. There's just been a study, a little bit more credible than what I would come out with at the top of my head, that only in Delhi, among students aged 14 to 21 years, only 2% say they speak English at home. So we're talking of an entire universe of techies and of ideas built around 2%.
Well, I think it raises a fundamental question that if people involved with that kind of decision making do not have the ability or are not able to recognize AI generated work from human generated work, then what is the value of human generated work? I think that is the question that gets asked. Because if eventually the idea of that report is to be used, it is utilitarian. I mean, it is an input into a decision. And if the people who are tasked with making that decision cannot, do not have the ability to tell the difference, then in a purely utilitarian sense, it kind of, in an instrumental sense, it works, right? The question, therefore, is the fact that, fundamentally, what our understanding of what expertise is about itself gets challenged. I mean, and what is the nature of expertise? If expertise does not involve being able to tell whether something is produced in a way that accounts for, reality, then of what use is that expertise?
This dialogue is a critical one, and we tend to ask questions of two sorts. One is, what is a virus? And AI can answer that. Let's say that's an example. But in the imaginative universe, we can ask questions of like, what if a virus could speak? That what if question and the relation to what is questions is the boundary which AI is not straddling at the moment. It is not meeting an emotional quotient because it defines knowledge as written script. It is not dealing with the senses, and it is not dealing with the importance of simulations in the way in which we construct narrative. Let me just say one thing, and this is a thought experience for all of us. Think of what happens when you listen to a good story or watch a film. Your palms will sweat, your eyes will fixate, your pulse rates will go up, and yet you know that this particular experience, simulated experience, is false. It's not true. So why are you really reacting in this, palm sweating way? And it is because we have been programmed to, these simulations act for us like flight simulators. This is what I argue in the thing. We practice emotional bonding. We learn about things like falling in love without necessarily having to experience that painful experience of climbing up a cliff ourselves. So this is a very important evolutionary narratives, conversations of evolutionary training our minds to understand what it is to be human. So I would say that simulations are just as important in human evolution, or maybe not just as, but very important in human experience as opposed to lived experience,